The Chargers were unable to fill all of their biggest needs in the draft, so today we're talking about where they will go with positions like safety, tight end, and running back. Is it time to call John Johnson?
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Drogemeyer, and we've been covering the Chargers together now for 7 seasons, but this is our 5th season as a host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you guys, as always, for making us your first listen today, and to make sure you never miss the show, go follow or subscribe for free on YouTube and listen wherever you get your podcast from. David, today, what are we getting into?
Yeah, on today's show, Daniel, we're going to take a look at what the biggest needs are now that the draft is all done, now that we know who all the picks are. So we're going to take a look and see, maybe if there's a safety out there that might make sense for the Chargers, if they're going to address the tight end position, and if they have any plans on bringing in any more running backs.
Yeah, I think those are all great questions, especially since there are some familiar names out there at corner, like a Bryce Callahan still available, right? Do they end up knocking on the tires of John Johnson III, something we thought might happen? And safety was a position, David, we thought could be addressed and had as one of the Chargers' needs going into the draft, because it's a very thin position with Derwin James, Alohi Gilman, and JT Woods. And there's a couple other factors in it, David, because JT Woods is a second-year player who did not play much, and when we did see him, he was really struggling to be able to tackle, which is a very important part of it. And also, Alohi Gilman is just going into this season as the starter opposite of Derwin James, so it wouldn't have been a surprise to see them try to get somebody in the draft, but it didn't happen.
Yeah, I was expecting it. I definitely had them in my mock draft. I had them taking a safety in the middle rounds. I felt like that's probably where they were going to try to attack that. I figured that they were going to bring somebody in, but maybe, they are a little bit more comfortable with Alohi Gilman playing meaningful snaps, or they are really, really banking on a resurgence of sorts, or a large linear progression for JT Woods.
They would have to, because at this point, my biggest thing is this, like, even if you love Alohi Gilman, right? And I've talked about before that he was good, especially during that Chargers 4-game winning streak towards the end of the season last year. Like, he was really good, the best version of Alohi Gilman we've ever seen.
No doubt.
At the same time, it wouldn't have been surprising to see them bring in some competition, or maybe, someone that could be a more long-term answer next to Derwin James with some development, or at least a short-term fix to see what you have in other guys like JT Woods and Alohi Gilman, right? Because Derwin James has missed time in 4 straight seasons. He missed the entire year as one of those years. He missed all but 5 games earlier on in his career after playing 16 games as a rookie. The last couple of years, he's been more healthy, and last year he missed a game due to suspension. But like right now, JT Woods is the next safety on the field, and that's just a hard thing to put all of your eggs in that basket. Guys progress differently, right? You don't know what kind of progression that could be made. But, like, to me, I would feel much more comfortable, David, if there's a veteran in the room. John Johnson has skated through this entire free agency process leading up to the draft with not enough interest to sign with a team. So now it has me here thinking, like, maybe now is the move to go get this dude because the price tag has come down.
Inevitably, right? It has to come down. And I think when you look at this situation from the Chargers' perspective, it makes sense that they would kind of, put a halt on talks or any communications if they did so before the draft, because it was all steam ahead for the draft, and you just never know what positions are going to be available when you decide to pick and where you have those valuations at. So now that the draft is over and you still kind of have that clear deficiency, at least to us. You have to have
at least
that
a depth
conversation.
deficiency. At least depth. Like, maybe like just 3 guys is not enough.
It's not enough at all. And I just don't know how you can feel comfortable. Like we talked about, I think Alohi Gilman definitely started to play better football towards the end of the year in specific packages. I do feel like that was the case. And for JT Woods, the ball skills are very real, and you can envision a role in your head of him playing like a deep center field type of player because he has the range and the speed and the ball skills. But the tackling is such a prohibitive thing in your mind that you have to see that get corrected. And just with that, amount of knowledge in that position group, it just makes you feel like signing a guy who understands the defensive scheme that you're going to play. Not only that, but has excelled in that scheme under your head coach, who is your defensive coordinator, just makes way too much sense now that the draft is over and the Chargers did not take a safety.
Yeah, I think it makes a ton of sense. Lindsey Theory from ESPN reported that the Chargers did have interest before the draft, right? So we know they at least kicked the tires on him.
Yeah.
But, he would be the best safety that Derwin James has ever played with, right? The most productive safety Derwin James has ever played with. And if Alohi Gilman is the right guy, then he will beat him out, right? But it doesn't mean he shouldn't have competition. And I think when you bring in a veteran like that, if one of your young guys goes and, hawks him and is the better player by the time the season rolls around,
then great.
All for it.
Yeah.
But to not have any competition for the second and third safety spot for this
team,
I
content
think is a mistake. Yeah, I think it's a mistake. But also, Tom Telesco deserves a little bit of the benefit of the doubt here because of the moves he's been able to make post-draft in his career, especially last year with Morgan Fox, Bryce Callahan, and also Kyle Van Noy, who all came in May. So, this is the time when we could absolutely see something. If you have a chance to potentially get a cheap option that could be a better fit for Derwin James, and not only that, but a dude who's actually played Derwin James's role, and a guy who could replace Derwin James if Derwin James gets injured, at least to some extent. Nobody can truly replace him, but someone who is the green dot in Brandon Staley's defense that could come in and seamlessly be able to run a lot of those things just makes too much sense to me. There's other connections out there too. Adrian Amos is another Vic Fangio guy with the Bears back in the day. Ronnie Harrison is a Jeff Howard guy, the Chargers' new linebacker coach who was coaching the secondary with Cleveland, who also had, John Johnson recently. And also Troy Hill, because corner is another position the Chargers did not address in the draft, and something that's surprising just because they have Jasir Taylor slotted to be their slot corner, no pun intended, right now going into the season. And you also don't know with what's happening with J.C. Jackson. I thought they would add corners because Brandon Staley, I always think they're going to add corners in the draft.
He definitely said as much.
Right, but with them not getting a corner in the draft, I think they are banking on, Jasir Taylor being good and being the guy for that role, and also feeling good about their depth with J.C. Jackson and the uncertainty of his return.
Yeah, I think the J.C. Jackson of it all is the most important thing. I mean, he's the guy that if he's able to come back and really be the guy that he used to be, he could be a huge wild card for this defense. I mean, and I think he could be the reason why we got so super excited when the Chargers signed him and gave him a big contract, because of his just crazy ability to lock people up man to man and to take the football away. I mean, he was one of the best in the NFL for a couple of years. You don't get the moniker of Mr. INT for no reason. But with that being said, you just don't know. You don't know if you're going to get that version. And I like Jasir Taylor. I think he definitely showed some things towards the end of the year. He definitely earned himself some snaps, but I am not there yet. I'm just handing him the keys to the car. I just don't know if he's ready to step in and be your permanent slot corner.
So would you rather have Bryce Callahan back at least for one season then? Are you trying to go back and see if he's willing to come back?
Yes, I think it would be a good idea. I think it's going to be a low-cost signing. I mean, he was able to stay healthy. He was very productive in the Brandon Staley scheme again. So I don't see why it would be a bad idea. And just like we said earlier, if Jasir Taylor comes in and you sign Bryce and he beats him out, then great. Then you're not putting a lot of money into this situation. But I just think it's such a smart signing to bring into your room. He's a veteran who's had production in the scheme. It just makes sense.
And I think I'm always going to, there's only so many spots on the roster, right? And
of course.
We know they're probably keeping 6 wide receivers this year. Who knows what they have to do with the defensive line because of the injuries to Tito and Austin Johnson. It's going to be interesting to see how the roster construction comes together. But, I'm almost always going to be in the favor of, hey, if there are cheap veterans out there that can come in and push some of these young guys, I'm in favor of it. Go ahead and sign it. Because, I just think that to just go in blindly and just hope for leaps
Yeah.
I just don't think that's a solid game plan. I just think he
Yeah.
is much veteran competition as possible, or at least other young guys in the draft. But these are all positions the Chargers chose not to address, like tight end, which was a big one going into the draft. And it sucks, David, because there's so many tight ends that we liked in this draft class. And Tom Telesco talked about all the tight ends in this draft class. And we know Kellen Moore loves tight ends. The Chargers didn't come away with it, but Kellen Moore is more worried about using what he does have and seems to not be as concerned because he still thinks he has plenty of pieces to work with. So we're going to talk about that and the Chargers' kind of happiness with their running back room as well, because there's another position they decided not to draft. Maybe they think a big jump is coming from Isaiah Spiller. But tight end, that one I'm less sure about, David. So we're going to talk about why they didn't end up with a tight end and where they go next with that position coming up after this. But I need to tell you guys that the official betting sponsor of the Locked On Chargers podcast is FanDuel. And right now you need to make a break to FanDuel during the NBA playoffs because they have a no-sweat first bet for new customers up to $1,000. That's $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. And there's so much to love about everything that you can do with FanDuel. You can go play your props. They have great promotions every day, so there's tons of specials that you can get in and boost your odds and do all sorts of fun things. And you're also getting a safe and secure app that pays you instantly. Nobody wants to wait for their money. But with the playoffs, they have a bunch of cool things going on, including the star player props, right? So many easy ways and quick ways with FanDuel that you can go find the best players in the NBA playoffs, see the over-unders for them and all the different kinds of, player props you can bet on for them in that game. And they'll also bundle them for you. There's a lot of good ones where you can get very good odds by going with something like LeBron James 20-plus points, right? And also a Lakers win. Get boosted odds there. And you also get that no-sweat first bet. So make sure you guys visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Get that bet up to $1,000. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Tight end was a position we scouted heavily during this process.
Very
David.
heavily, yeah.
And it sucks because it seems like there's a need there still after the draft. And I mean, if you're looking at what happened during the draft, it just seemed like the Chargers weren't willing enough to take one in the first round when they had their, every option available to them. And it seems like they missed out on some guys because Kellen Moore talked about this when, the Chargers didn't address tight end. He said sometimes drafts, they just go that way. There were a lot of tight ends in this draft that we liked. Sometimes that's just the way the draft go. But it sucks, David, because there were so many, it felt like, opportunities in this draft to not just find somebody that can help you and be a better blocker specifically for Kellen Moore's offense or just another weapon for Kellen Moore this season, but also to kind of find that tight end of the future with, Donald Parham going into, 2-year contract that doesn't have a ton of guaranteed money, and Gerald Everett going into the last year of his contract, and they didn't come away with that.
Yeah, you just don't look. You can't look at the room and feel like you have the guy that's going to be here for 3 or 4 years. I mean,
besides Trey McKitty,
right? Besides Trey McKitty, but you didn't really get too much out of Trey McKitty last year, unfortunately. So
that was a joke.
Yeah, thank you for announcing that. I appreciate that. But yes, I mean, I don't. You look at that room, and it's just not a lot of people there that you feel like are going to be here for multiple seasons. You didn't have that person that you feel like you could pair with Justin Herbert to grow with Justin Herbert and be that weapon and be that security blanket with him throughout the years. I feel like that's still that person is still out there. And I feel like, because they didn't address it now, it makes it much, much more important and more of a pressing need. And you might have to spend more premium draft capital on making sure you get a good one next season.
Yeah, and I do understand that, like, the draft falls a certain way, right? They drafted in the first round. By the time the second round came around, Dalton Kincaid, Michael Mayer, Sam Laporta, Luke Musgrave, those dudes were all gone, right? Maybe they were guys they really liked, but they weren't willing to reach for them. But now they put themselves in a position where Kellen Moore used historically a lot of 2 tight end formations. That's one of the biggest ways we talked about with Brett Coleman doing that breakdown for the Chargers YouTube channel. Like, that's how he created mismatches in the running game to where he could basically attack any type of defense and find mismatches or find one-on-one matchups for his running backs to find a hole and kind of exploit it, right?
Yeah.
The Chargers don't, on paper, have the guys to do that. They don't have the personnel to be, run blocking heavy kind of a team and move people around that way because Gerald Everett is a good blocker, I guess, for his size, right? And I don't think he's a terrible blocker. No. Donald Parham, right? First of all, he has to stay on the field, which is a big part of it, But Also, blocking not his specialty. Trey McKitty was supposed to be that guy, right? And it hasn't, and it looked almost, they've talked about him needing to be better and just not getting what they needed from him last season.
Right.
So
In the same fashion of Michael Davis, when they did it with Michael Davis and they called him out and said, hey, these are, several things that we need you to improve on. And to his credit, he came back and worked on them, and he was phenomenal last year. He was a huge reason why the Chargers defense was getting better towards the end of the year. I mean, he was one of the best defenders on the field for them. So we can only hope that Trey McKitty, does the same thing.
yeah, but are you going to bank on that?
Definitely not.
Okay, so I mean, that I don't know how realistic that is, but this is what Kellen Moore had to say about it. We probably use a little bit more tight ends maybe the last couple of years in Dallas, a little bit more 12 and 13 personnel, which is actually 3 tight ends on the field, which is nuts. Some of those different things that suited us well, we'll do whatever it suits us best and kind of build this thing. I'm excited about the guys we have. I think all of them have traits that are exciting. I'm excited just to work with them. And that is basically, to me, David, kind of reading through the lines here, is just we're going to have to find other ways to create mismatches, right? And the other thing about having 2 tight ends on the field is now you have a pretty good trio of receivers, right? To maybe now the focus is more, okay, I can create mismatches in the running game by having people have to think about guarding, Keenan Allen and Quentin Johnston and Mike Williams and Gerald Everett, right, all at the same time.
And Austin Ekeler out in the flat. I mean, it's just a pick your poison type of situation on the offense. But yeah, it definitely seems like they are going to be looking at attacking differently, not the same exact way that they were doing it in Dallas.
Building the offense differently too, yeah.
Right. Yeah, building the offense differently and, trying to utilize the offense differently. Yeah. And he's, one of the things that I really love that he said is, we'll suit it however it's best suited for our players. Whatever's best suits us, we can adapt and adjust however we need to. And that's incredibly important, not only, with the pieces that you have now, but being able to make adjustments in game, which we have seen examples of him being able to do in some of those film breakdowns. So it's just a breath of fresh air to be able to hear an offensive coordinator say, hey, I'm going to use, and of course I know it's cliche, and then Dan's kind of rolling his eyes a little bit, but
I was trying to think of what Joe Lombardi said, because Joe Lombardi said the same thing, right? He said he was going to build the offense around Justin Herbert. It's great to say these things, follow up on it. You need to see it actually come to fruition. I've heard it before. I need to see it.
Of course. I mean, I want to see what the offense looks like right now, but I mean, we are a long ways away from that. But one thing we do know is the Chargers have a ton of wide receiver talent now, and it feels like that's the way they're going to be, the primary way they're going to be attacking defenses.
At least that's what we're, kind of making out of it. Maybe the guys can block well enough where that's still something that they can use a lot and scheme things off of. But I think the hard thing is now is there's really nothing out there that's going to move the needle in free agency. So next year it feels like you're going to be going into it with the same kind of big need there, right? Because Gerald Everett's going to be a free agent. Donald Parham, who knows, but he's never had more than 20 catches in a season through his 3 years, right? So, you're not going to be able – you might be able to find a guy who fits what you do a little better, but it's not going to be someone who's going to drastically change your offense.
You're right, but there is a guy, Daniel. There is a guy that the Chargers can go to if they need a tight end in a pinch. And of course, I'm talking about defensive tackle Scott Matlock, who scored 2 touchdowns last year for Boise. And it was funny, they were talking about it in the press conference, and he said, oh, yes, he's already told me. Boise State head coach Andy Avalos immediately sent them to me. He's the head coach at Boise. He sent them to me as soon as Matlock.
Touchdowns that Scott Matlock scored in his time at Boise, because he did score 2 touchdowns there.
Yes. Right? So he said, for you guys concerned about the tight end position, maybe we have something there. So
yeah, he's kind of stole my joke, honestly.
But,
I mean, because I'm the one that said that on Twitter. Hey, the Chargers waited a long time in the draft, but finally they took a tight end in the 6th round. So I think the thing is, there are guys out there like Jeff Swaim, a guy that has ties to Kellen Moore, both as a player and when he was a coach with the Cowboys. And also, you were looking at guys like Tyler Kroft. It's just not a ton of exciting names that are going to move the needle. And it would have been hard, respectfully, in fairness to Tom Telesco, even getting big-time contributions out of a rookie tight end would have been tough, right?
Yeah.
So, I think the biggest thing here is it doesn't feel like the future at tight end is on the roster. And it felt like this was a draft where you could get your future at tight end. And I think
It
that's
definitely
the hard
felt
part.
like they definitely, it feels like they missed an opportunity here. And this was a draft that was universally touted as a very deep tight end draft class.
Yeah,
And
Tom Telesco said it himself, right? He talked about it
exactly.
before
So,
the draft.
I mean, and yeah, obviously those pre-draft, press conferences are filled with smoke and mirrors, but it seemed like that was a true statement that he truly believed that. But, like Kellen Moore said, the draft just doesn't always fall the way you want it to.
And another thing that Kellen Moore said, right, is that he has to kind of build and get more from position groups just by the scheme that he's running, right? And that's the one big thing here is the Chargers didn't improve their tight end group. They're running it back, and like they do have like Stone Smart, who's more of a receiving option. Hunter Camp Moyer.
Yeah.
No, those guys move the needle for me, obviously. But the other place they're really going to need some contributions as far as improvements is going to be at running back, because the Chargers decided not to draft a running back in this last draft class, and they're deciding to pretty much run it back and hope for, a big leap from Isaiah Spiller, hope for Rashawn Slater's impact and coming back healthy, and much more. But the Chargers didn't address it, and it doesn't feel like they're going to. So we're going to get into that right after this. One of the other positions we scouted going into the draft was running back, because we knew the Chargers, could potentially try to add to the position, because there's kind of question marks going into this season with the guys that they have, especially with Austin Ekeler, who, has requested a trade. So that, I think that was why going in, it's like, okay, hey, this could be a very realistic chance that the Chargers could take a running back. But
you had to plan for it. Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, and it didn't seem like they were very urgently trying to find a contingency plan for Austin Ekeler in case he does get traded. But it is something that we're going to have to see. But I do want to tell you guys right now, make sure you're back here as well for tomorrow's show, because we are going to be doing a Chargers mailbag. So get your questions in the YouTube comments today. If you want to, you can call into the voicemail line at 323-524-7924. The everydayers already know the number by heart, and we appreciate you guys. But we're also going to be trying to do a little bit of a draft crossover with the Chargers Unleashed podcast that we have coming up potentially later on in the week. So we're going to see how that goes, but we want to do another little round table situation. Maybe that will be for a Friday show, but a lot to make sure you're here for it later on in the week for the everydayers. We appreciate you guys. But getting to the running back, David, it did feel like the Chargers didn't feel like they needed to address that in this draft class, and they didn't.
No, they definitely did not. And that was a surprise to me. But after the draft and with the comments that Tom Telesco made, it's very, very clear they're not. And he said, when they were asked about looking at adding a veteran running back, he said, I wouldn't think so. I kind of like the guys that we have right now. Austin's a veteran, Josh Kelly's a young veteran, and Isaiah Spiller is young. It's a good mix. So that's Tom Telesco saying straight up, we are not adding another running back. We like our room. We are going to run it back with this room. And so looking at that, you have to expect that they are going to probably, have some more contributions from Isaiah Spiller. They have to.
I think more than that, what it tells me, David, is that Austin Ekeler isn't going anywhere. Right?
Definitely,
to me,
yes.
That's kind of the biggest thing I take away from that comment, because,
And I kind of felt that. I felt that anyway. I mean, just with the situation, with the contract he was looking for, no team is wanting to pay that, obviously, because nothing has happened so far. So the most likely situation was that Austin Ekeler was going to be back with the Chargers for this.
And he's going to play out his current contract or get an extension. That potentially the door on that hasn't closed yet either. But I think it felt like the draft was kind of a trade deadline of sorts for me, as far as an Austin Ekeler deal getting done. At this point, it seems like the only way Austin Ekeler is getting moved is by a Godfather-like offer, right? Something way more than you'd expect for a guy who's going to the extension's going to kick in for a 29-year-old running back. But it seems like it's going to have to be an offer they can't refuse. But the only way that's going to happen is probably if another star running back on a team in contention gets hurt. Yeah. And even then, at this point, Austin Ekeler is so important to what you do offensively and has been, under a different offense, but we know the impact Austin Ekeler has had on this team. And I'm very excited to see what he looks like under Kellen Moore. But that's one of the biggest things I took away from the Chargers, not addressing this need or a perceived need, at least from the outside looking in this draft class. Because, it was nice to talk about Bijan Robinson. It was nice for all that. But, there's also, an interesting thing here as far as is the running back of the future currently on this roster, right? Because Austin Ekeler could play this season out, so it might not affect you this year. But
Right.
Hard to imagine if they don't extend him and you get to next year that he's going to want to come back to the Chargers, or the Chargers are going to be willing to give him, after 38 touchdowns, if they weren't willing to give it to him this season, what is he going to have to do in 2023 to get the contract he wants, right? Josh Kelly's also entering the last season of his rookie deal.
Yeah.
So it's another position where, yes, it might not be a need right for you now. And, if they do end up adding a running back, maybe they go for a Zeke or a Kareem Hunt or Leonard Fournette if they have an injury and they want someone who's experienced, right? I'd pass on basically all those guys. I think the Chargers would too.
Yeah.
But I do think that, it is a fair question to wonder if the running back of the future is still on this roster, because at this point, we just haven't really seen anything from Isaiah Spiller.
Right. And I'm asking myself why, and I'm asking the Chargers why. Why haven't we seen more from Isaiah Spiller, even just later on in the season? I mean, even if you had time to recover from the ankle injury and then get comfortable in the offense, I get all of that. But towards the end of the season, when he was healthy, I don't feel like there's any reason why he shouldn't have been playing. And now you really have to know what you have in him. You got to give him, ample playing time to be able to show you what he is capable of doing, because if not, what's the point? You have to do this, and especially with the room the way it looks, and Austin Ekeler probably going to leave after this season in free agency, and you don't know what the year is going to look like for Josh Kelly. This is a big prove-it year for both those guys, for Kelly and, more importantly, for Isaiah Spiller. I mean, this has to be the welcome to the NFL, this is who I am type of season for him.
Yeah, that's the best case scenario, and it feels like this is a year where the Chargers are going to need to see what they have in Isaiah Spiller, because they're going to have some big decisions to make, and running back goes into a bigger need in the 2024 department, right? Kind of like tight end, where it's like now it feels like we're going to get to this point,
you're forced
a little
to
early in next year, where you're going to be, need more urgency, because the future of those positions potentially isn't in the room. Even if you have Isaiah Spiller go off this year, like Austin Ekeler and Josh Kelly both could be leaving. So you still are going to have some tough decisions when when these conversations have to happen in 2024. But I do think with Isaiah Spiller, the reason he didn't play, David, is because he wasn't good enough to beat out Josh Kelly or Austin Ekeler for snaps, and later on in the season, Larry Roundtree for snaps, right? Like, that just is what it is. They're telling you directly or indirectly, whether it's pass protection, right? Whether it's just the reads he's making or not doing enough with the carries and very, very small sample size that he had. They told you last year he wasn't good enough to get on the field. And Tom Telesco has indirectly said that by saying, hey, he was in competition for snaps with a lot of guys and had really good guys in front of him. Problem is, David, both of those same guys are still in front of him this year. So what's to say that we're going to see more of him this year? It just feels like they have to, right? If they're going to get improvement, seems like part of that is going to have to be from Isaiah Spiller. And guess what? We saw a huge leap by a running back literally last year, because Josh Kelly looked like an entirely different player. So it's not like it's out of the woods.
Yeah.
I'm bullish on Isaiah Spiller too. It's just going into the camp with, those kind of unknowns is always a little bit risky. I like the running back room. Seems like they really like their running back room for sure. And I think the other thing, David, that they're really, really banking on, besides just an Isaiah Spiller leap, is Kellen Moore's offensive scheme, whether that's with more tight ends on the field or not, is going to help this running game. And maybe the most underrated factor of the Chargers improving their running game is the return of Rashawn Slater.
Oh, it's huge. It's absolutely massive to be able to insert an all-pro left tackle into your room, into your offensive line, who's an absolute beast. I mean, just no matter what you ask him to do. And an all-pro pass protector, an absolute mauler in the running game, a guy that just annihilates people. He opens up cavernous holes. Him being gone, and hey, Jamari Sawyer played very admirably, and I feel like he definitely showed some things, but it's hard to go from an all-pro to what Jamari Sawyer was able to do. I mean, and like I said,
even if he was an average left tackle, which is insane for a 6th-round pick that was supposed to be a guard, like that's insanely good for Jamari Sawyer, but Jamari Sawyer's season last year would not have been considered a good season for Rashawn Slater.
Exactly. There's levels to it, and Rashawn Slater has already proven and shown that he is a just straight-up difference maker. So him, coupled with the schematic changes that Kellen Moore is going to bring to the table, I think they're banking on, not only, getting some positive movement in the running game situation, but also being able to attack deep down the field on the passing side. So they are really, really banking on running things back for the most part on offense, and expecting Kellen Moore to be that major difference maker.
And I hope that he is, and I'm so excited to see it, right? Because it
Yes.
is, one of the things that we just have no idea how it's going to translate for Kellen Moore. But you're talking about a guy who's run one of the best, most efficient offenses in the NFL over the last 3 seasons.
And most balanced, too.
And pairing him with Justin Herbert, but not also pairing him with Justin Herbert, but just pairing him with Justin Herbert with Keenan Allen and Austin Ekeler and Quentin Johnston in the mix now, right? With Gerald Everett and, Isaiah Spiller and Josh Kelly and Austin Ekeler. Like he has weapons as well as potentially the best offensive line we've seen from the Chargers in a long time. So, that, I think those are all legit, valid reasons to be excited. And I think the one thing you have seen with him, whether it's Cooper Rush, whether it's the injuries on the offensive line, this dude actually does evolve and he changes his offense and he can actually be more malleable. He can be more flexible with what he can do offensively and build it around his players. I got maggots. It's we heard Joe Lombardi say the same thing. We've actually seen it with this dude, right? This dude has done it. So even though, it could be eyewash and things like that, when you hear it, there's more reason to believe that this dude can do it. And I'm really, really excited to see it, For better or for worse, I think they're going to improve offensively a lot this season. And I think Justin Herbert with Kellen Moore is going to be something that, no matter how it kind of comes, it's hard for me to think Justin Herbert isn't going to have one of, if not his best seasons in 2023 under Kellen Moore with the weapons at his disposal. But there's so much that can happen between now and training camp, and we'll see how all of these needs kind of flesh themselves out in the positions they decide to address. Tom Telesco likes to add cheap veterans in this part of the year. We'll see how he decides to kind of augment this roster in some key positions that he adds depth to in these next coming weeks. But that's going to do it for today's show. Make sure you guys are back here tomorrow for the Chargers mailbag and on Friday for a little roundtable Chargers draft discussion with the Chargers Unleashed podcast, as well as next week, because guess what? We're every day, every week, every day, as you already know. But next week, getting more into the undrafted free agent pile, right? And some very exciting guys, even a guy I already talked about for the Chargers that's now on the team as an undrafted free agent. So we'll talk about which one of those guys is most likely to kind of make a run at a spot, because that is another place where the Chargers historically have found ways to add to needs or fill needs, right? Austin Ekeler being one of those key examples of that. So a lot to be excited about there. And the Chargers every year keep an undrafted free agent. So this year I'm sure might be no different. So we'll be talking about that, but make sure you're back tomorrow for the mailbag. And make sure you don't miss it. Subscribe or follow for free on YouTube and listen wherever you get your podcast from. You can also ask us questions in the YouTube comments or by hitting us up at LockedOnLAC on Twitter. And also you can find David in his DMs on Twitter at DroTalkSD. Find me on Twitter at DanTalkSports. If you guys want to call in and get your voicemail line in, we'll be taking voicemails as well. You can call into 323-524-7924. Give us any of your questions about the Chargers draft class that they just had or whatever you want to talk about. Keep it around 30 seconds. There's a good chance it gets on the show. But that's it for us today. Make sure you're back here tomorrow for the mailbag episode. But until then, take it easy and go Bolts.